there, and welcome to our show, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. I'm bestselling author Bianca, and I'm joined by CeCe Lira of Wendy Sherman Associates and Carly Waters of PS Literary. Hi everyone, today's guest is a USA Today bestselling author who has won 5 Agatha Awards, 5 Anthony Awards, the Daphne, the McCavity, and the Mary Higgins Clark Award. As an on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV, she's won 37 Emmy Awards and many more journalism honors. A past president of National Sisters in Crime, a founder of Mystery Writers of America University, and a board member of International Thriller Writers, she lives in Boston. It's my pleasure to welcome back Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank, welcome back.
Thank you. I am such a fan, Bianca. This is wonderful.
It is amazing to get to speak to you because I'm a mutual fan. I just want to say, in terms of excellent literary citizenship, I am always talking about this on the podcast, about giving back to our community. And honestly, there's nobody who does it more than Hank. And Hank, you are so busy, and yet you still find time to give back constantly to the literary community.
We're all in this together, right? And you do exactly the same thing. Not only do I absolutely love my colleagues in the literary community, but I'm fascinated by them. I'm absolutely curious about what they do and how they do it. And what better way to help spread the word about a good book? I mean, if someone says, "Do you want to read a good book and then interview an author about it?" I'm like, yes, I do. That's what I would love to do in any lifetime. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, but I really do just want to point out that it's a lot of work that is not paid. Hank is constantly paying it forward, and we really, really appreciate her. So for those of you watching on our YouTube channel, I'm holding up All This Could Be Yours, which is Hank's latest book that we're going to be discussing today. I'm quickly reading the flap copy so that you've got some context, and then I've got a huge list of questions, so we are diving straight in. Debut sensation Tessa Calloway is on a whirlwind book tour for her instant bestseller, All This Could Be Yours. In a different city every night, Tessa receives standing ovations from fans while her husband and 2 children cheer her on from their brand new dream house. But there's a chilling problem with Tessa's triumphant book tour. She soon realizes she's been stalked by someone who's obsessed not only with sabotaging her career, but also with destroying her perfect family. Tessa feels the fallout from an impossible decision she once made. What felt like a genuine deal with the devil appears to be coming due. If Tessa can't untangle who's threatening to expose her darkest secrets, she'll lose her career, her family, and possibly her life. Dun, dun, dun. Talk about high stakes, Hank. Right. So quickly, I'd love to know the inspiration for this. As an author, was this something that came to you on book tour? Tell us about it.
Well, someone said to me that a good idea is like putting a Mento into a Coke. Have you ever done that? You put the Mento into a Coke and it kaboom, it explodes. So the Mento is pretty good and the Coke is pretty good, but together it's a completely different proposition. And that's exactly what happened with All This Could Be Yours. It started with a mistake. A bookstore owner, I was going to do a book event for one of my other books, The House Guest. And the bookstore owner made a graphic that said, "See Hank Phillippi Ryan and the hotel guest." And I thought, come on, the book is right there. It's the house guest. And then I thought, well, but the hotel guest, that's not a bad idea. That's not a bad title. And I sort of tucked that away, but I couldn't do it because I had my book, The House Guest. So then fast forward, I was in Scottsdale, Arizona at the Poisoned Pen bookstore, the famous haven for mystery readers and authors. And I signed a book to someone that said something like, "So wonderful to see you in Scottsdale," and the date and my name. And then I thought, well, there's an alibi for someone, right? It proves that I was there and they were there and we were in Scottsdale together at that certain time at my signing on that date. Then I started thinking about all the other things that we all sign in books. "Thank you for a wonderful evening." What could that really mean? Or "It was so lovely to see you," or "Thank you so much for everything you've done. I'm so grateful." And you could weaponize that in any way you wanted. And I started thinking about, because only authors think this way, only crime fiction authors think this way. How could I take everything on book tour, like signing a book, a lovely, wonderful thing that we all desire beyond anything, and weaponize that into being a terrifying thriller? So I thought about schedules. Every single place we are as authors is on our website. We want you to come. We want to be public. We want you to know where we are at 7 p.m. on Tuesday. On the other hand, that means everybody knows where we are at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, and everybody also knows where we aren't. And that started becoming really chilling to me. So I took the hotel guest, the Mento, and I took this vulnerability of authors, the Coke, and put them together to create this sort of cross country cat and mouse chase, this sort of book tour from hell that turns into an author running for her life.
Yeah, you got the kaboom, Hank. You put the mento in and it kaboomed. It was amazing. There was so much of my own experience for my first book tour because nowadays they don't really do book tours as well as they used to many years ago. But, the being in hotels and not knowing what city you're actually in and not knowing what city you're going to tomorrow and these stream of strangers' faces, the whole thing, it was incredible. So anybody, never mind the story in terms of what we're going to unpack. Anyone who wants to know what book tour is like, read this book. It gives you so much and that's obviously based on Hank's experience.
So funny, Bianca, because I tell my author friends, don't read this book until you get home because it's too creepy to read on the road because it's so personal and so meta that it's sort of disturbing to think about how every single thing we do on the road can absolutely be dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it freaked me out. I'm not going to lie. It made me go, I'm kind of glad I didn't have to go on tour across the US for this particular book that I brought out. So, yeah. So let's talk about the book within a book. So your book is called All This Could Be Yours. There is a book within a book. The main character writes a book called All This Could Be Yours. Can we speak a bit about your process there? Did you have to first figure out what book she wrote and what that was about so that you could talk about it on the road? Or was that something that evolved as you were writing?
That's a really interesting question because that was such a pivotal moment of the book. Because when I started writing my book, All This Could Be Yours, I started thinking about how Tessa's book, All This Could Be Yours, would be and what kind of a book she would write. And I have to tell you, and I'm not sure if it's laziness, procrastination, or just sort of how writers work, but I just thought, I'm just going to write this and see how this book evolves to be. I knew I didn't want to write Tessa's whole book in the book, or even much of Tessa's book in the book, because I wanted the readers to figure out for themselves what her book must be about by a supreme amount of clues. Clearly, it's about female empowerment. Clearly, it's about a confident woman. Clearly, it's about a woman who gets her life back. Clearly, it's about a woman who's had something terrible happen to her and inspirationally succeeds. And that's parallel to Tessa, my main character's life. So it's clearly a woman's book. Tessa goes to bookstores and libraries and she's just applauded and cheered by the people who attend her events. And she's clearly inspired them and they want to be just like Annabelle in the book. And as a result, they want to be just like Tessa in real life. And so it sort of conflates my main character, Tessa Calloway's life, with her main character, Annabelle Brown's life. So the book in a book is sort of a vehicle for the story and sort of a way to make the whole thing super meta, because I'll be on book tour talking about a book called All This Could Be Yours, which is about an author on book tour talking about a book called All This Could Be Yours.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. But I also love that you didn't first sit down and go, okay, this is exactly what this book is about. Because, as she speaks and certain people ask her questions about the book, it highlights why that book resonated with certain people. And we get an understanding of why she wrote this particular book. There's a lot of curiosity seeds and you have to keep turning the pages to figure it out. But I like that evolved. Something that you do so well, and we discussed that with your last book as well, is the ticking clock. You always have this ticking clock, which is so propulsive. I mean, this story happens over how many days?
I think it happens. Oh, no, that's a tough question, Bianca. I think it happens over about a week.
Yeah, it's around about a week. And then obviously we have flashbacks to the past, but in terms of the actual linear timeline, it's about a week. And the stakes keep getting upped and things keep happening. So the tension keeps ramping. And we spoke about this in the previous interview about the narrative thrust and how that needs to be moving forward relentlessly in a story like this, a psychological thriller. So can you speak to us a bit about how you approach that when writing?
It's fascinating. And I was really lucky about the structure of this book because on book tour has a structure of its own, a relentless ticking clock structure of its own. Tessa is in a different city every day, in a different airport every day, in a different hotel every day, in a different bookstore or library every day. In fact, except for the flashbacks, the present time of the book takes place only in airports, airplanes, hotels, bookstores, and libraries. And Tessa, in her job, in her real life, must be at a certain place at a certain time. And if she misses her schedule, if she misses a plane, or if a plane is late, or if she's held up somewhere, her entire schedule falls apart. So every moment of every day, she's on this stressful tightrope of making her schedule work. And so, from a writing point of view, that makes it really fun to write because she has to get up at the crack of dawn to go to the airport to make the plane. The plane has to be on time. The plane has to arrive on time. She has to get her suitcase. She has to get to the hotel. She has to get to the bookstore. She has to get to the library. I'm stressing myself out by saying this to you, but it has sort of, and you know the feeling so totally, but it has the built-in pressure. Not to mention that she's the sole breadwinner for her family. So if she doesn't sell books, if she doesn't succeed, her family situation completely falls apart because her husband, although he's lovely and wonderful and her children are darling, her husband can't really hold a job. And so this is all on Tessa's shoulders. Meanwhile, the publisher and her publicist and her editor in New York are calling her saying, how's it going? How's it going? Are you selling books? Is everything working right? Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, or else your career is over. So, on the one hand, Tessa is this glamorous, successful, best-selling, what we always hoped we'd always be, aspirational author. She's the best that it could ever be. On the other hand, as she realizes in the book, she's a traveling salesman who's going on someone else's schedule, and she cannot fail. She cannot make a mistake. She cannot be 1 minute late. And the stress level of that, or everything will fall apart. Her family, her career, her life will fall apart. So that has a built-in ticking clock.
Yeah, and all really high stakes because it's her family, it's her career, it's letting other people down. So, whenever we say in stories that we need really high stakes, this is a perfect example of that. Something that you said now also made me think because it's quite interesting to see the balance of agency and infantilization that kind of happens on author book tours because you have to wake up and you have to meet the people. But in fact, you're working on a schedule that has been put together by your publicist and the bookstores. And when you come in, you kind of get shepherded down to sign books and you've got to keep repeating the same sort of spiel over and over unless you come up with something different for that particular city. So there is the agency, but there's also you're just going along the schedule and you can't deviate from that schedule or else it's going to cause huge issues.
I mean, personally, and vis-a-vis Tessa, my fictional character, personally, it's incredibly stressful to be on book tour. I embrace it. I love it. It is as wonderful as anything could possibly be. And I think about it like being an actor in a Broadway show almost. You come on stage every night and you do the performance, and you know that you have to be absolutely 100% at every performance because there are people in the audience who have never seen you before. So even though it's something that you've done essentially over and over, that's essentially the same, although yes, it is absolutely different in every city. My responsibility and Tessa's responsibility, just like a Broadway actor's responsibility, is to absolutely give it your all every time. And that's how I think about it. And that's how Tessa thinks about it too. And even additionally, with readers who you and I adore and rely on, those people are the people who have read our books and connect with our books. So Tessa and you and I feel a genuine affection and a genuine responsibility to those people to give it all we've got. On the other hand, you and I both know authors who go on book tour with bodyguards, who have bodyguards who come with them to their events because sometimes fans, and that's why it comes from the word fanatic, sometimes fans decide that because they love your book, they love you. And because they love you, you must love them and they must be your friend and you owe them something. And if you owe them something and you disappoint them, then they're going to turn on you. And so this is another balance that Tessa has to deal with. She and all of us have to deal with. She genuinely loves her readers. And I try to make that very, very clear
Okay.
in the book that Tessa is in love with this whole thing. She just didn't realize the stresses that it would bring. And she didn't realize how terrifying it would be the moment that the moderator says, "Does anybody have any questions?" And then there's that little silence where she wonders, oh my goodness, is this going to be the time that someone asks me the question I don't want to hear? And you know that feeling that when they say here's the Q&A and you think, oh, please, please, please let this be not terrifying. And for Tessa, it turns out to be terrifying, and it gets more terrifying as the cities go by.
Yeah, I mean, you do such a great exploration of the parasocial relationships between authors and their readers, etc., and the expectations that people have of authors. And because authors now interact with them on social media, people think that they have a friendship. And like you say, there are those expectations there.
Is interesting because we genuinely there are friendships certainly
Yeah,
that develop online and on social media. Are people that we authentically love that
yeah.
we don't really know, that we just meet on social media. It's just this dangerous line that sometimes gets crossed, and we never know when that's going to happen. And for Tessa, it's happened.
Yeah. And also during the Q&As, people can ask the most inappropriate questions that have got nothing to do with your book, and you should respond to them honestly. And the scary part that Hank really leverages here is that one event doesn't happen in a vacuum, because people post about it on social media. People will go, Tessa was really cagey about this question in Portland or Seattle, and then the next people who go to see her pick up on that and run with it as well. So something you do really well is you torture your character by constantly upping the tension and stakes. Can we speak a bit about that?
People always talk about put your character up the tree, get your character up a tree, and then throw rocks at them. And Donald Moss talks about asking, what would be the worst thing that could happen to your character at this moment? Then how could you make that worse? Then how can you make that worse? Then how can you make that worse? And I absolutely rely on that. I mean, I've been a television reporter for 40 years. And if I went up to somebody's house and said, hello, Mrs. Smith, I'm Hank Phillippi Ryan from Channel 7. Did you murder that guy? And they say, yes, I did, then that wouldn't be much of a story, right? So the reason we write a story is that something happens, something high stakes, something important, something absolutely life-changing happens. And those kinds of problems don't get solved instantly. So my goal is to have you love my main character, Tessa, root for Tessa, and be absolutely terrified with her as everything she always wanted seems to be going down the drain. And it makes sense if you have a stalker, if you have someone who's out to ruin your life and ruin your career, that they would be doing this step by step by step, because part of the quote, quote, fun for a bad guy is to let the victim know that they are on to them and watch them twist slowly, slowly in the wind and see if they can escape. And if there's a DNA to my books, it is that. It is that there's a strong woman who gets the rug pulled out from under her, and she has to figure out how to get her life back. So for Tessa and for Annabelle in the book in a book, that's exactly what the progression is.
Yeah, and in terms of getting the reader on board with her, I mean, you begin with a scene that is her walking into an elevator. Tell our readers the scene you began with, and I'll talk about how that immediately gets us on her side.
Thank you. I mean, that prologue, which I don't call a prologue, is just an opening, was the last thing I wrote, interestingly. And I thought, I need to let people know where Tessa is coming from with this. So Tessa is a corporate trainer, which she calls a soul crushing job, even though sometimes it's rewarding. And one day at her corporate office, it's just the last straw. She's in a meeting and she tells everyone what she thinks is a great idea. The men on the board absolutely ignore her. And 10 minutes later, a guy comes up with the same idea and he's lauded and applauded as a genius. And she just can't take it anymore. And then she's assigned to help him with his brilliant project. And she just says, no, I'm just not doing this anymore. I have one life. I have one life to live. I have one chance. I have one possibility of following my dreams. And I'm not going to sit here in this office and be invisible. She says, I could rob a bank and get away with it because I am so invisible. So Tessa is tired of being invisible and walks off the job live on Instagram. And people are with her saying, go for it, go for it. We're so ready. We're so ready. And she's empowered. And look what happens to her, though, when she becomes too visible. So that's part of the story as well. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think it's so relatable to think how many of us have thought, I'm invisible. Why does nobody listen to me? I'm here, you all. So this is Tessa's desire to take her life back. And we see that in real time at the beginning of the story.
Yeah, and most women can relate to that. So you give us something relatable and we immediately relate to her. We're immediately cheering her on, which makes the rest so much easier. I'm glad that you came back and added that at the end because I really think we needed to see that shift in her. We needed to see her make that decision and see her vulnerability as she steps off that cliff pretty much.
And we also know from that little opening that she's a loving mom with adorable children and she loves her husband and that she just wants to take her life back a little bit. I think that feeling is really empowering and relatable, as you say, for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. So the challenge with writing this kind of book, Hank, is that it can feel so much like Groundhog Day, right? Because an author waking up, needing to catch an Uber or be met by their driver, going to the airport, waiting for their flight, being on the flight, getting to their hotel, going to the book event over and over and over again can feel very much like Groundhog Day. So can we talk a bit about how you were able to differentiate each day by the increasing threats, by the different people who arrive, the inappropriate questions that get asked, and the different kind of booksellers, etc., that she interacts with along the way?
So that is such a great question because happily, I never thought about that as a pitfall, that it would seem a little bit like Groundhog Day, because the sort of structure in my mind was this escalating structure that it's sort of like Tessa is the target and that she's a target on the move. So she always thinks, well, if I go to the next place, I'll be safe and everything will be fine. And then she begins to realize that the threat is following her, which means that the threat is real. It's not her paranoia. It's not her imagination. It's not her exhaustion and starvation from being on book tour, but something is really happening that she cannot ignore. And what we learn eventually soon is that Tessa fears that it's her fault, that what's happening to her that's so threatening and so sinister was her own fault as a result of a sort of Faustian bargain, what really felt like a deal with the devil that she made some years ago. And she wonders if the devil is coming back to claim his due. So it's even more difficult for her to deal with because if she says something to people about this, then they'll say, why do you think this is happening to you? And she'll have to reveal the secret that will ruin her life. So she's pressured from all angles of it. So there's a different hotel. Yes, it's true that on book tour, it all runs together and it all seems the same. And you really have to wake up in the morning and look at your schedule to find out where you are. And I use that, Bianca, to show the disequilibrium of a person who's out on the road, the idea that you don't even know where you are, that you don't even know what day it is really discomforting. And I use that to make the story be even scarier, I hope.
Yeah, very much so, because it shows how untethered she is, how disconnected from reality. She's away from her family. She's away from her husband. Even her conversations with her editor and her publicist, etc., happens over the phone. And there's kind of a conversation early on where she gets told what's in her publishing contract and what would come back to bite her in the butt. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Her agent, who's tough, says to her, are you okay? Is everything okay? And Tessa says, yes, 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 everything is okay. I just don't want to talk about my personal life. And she's sort of getting ready to go on book tour. And her agent says, you don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk about in public. You stay private as much as you want to stay private. And the agent pauses then and says, unless there's really something bad. And if there's really something bad, you better tell me that right now, because you have a clause in your contract that's a sort of moral turpitude contract. And if you do anything that puts you or your book or the agency or the publisher in a bad light, you're doomed, you're toast, you're done. And your career will not only be over, but you'll have to give back your advance. So you better tell me now if there's anything in your past. And she says, no, there's really nothing. And that's a lie. That's
Yeah.
a lie. And the question is, will that come back to haunt her? And the other thing that you brought up that I think is so interesting is that, yes, she's dealing with her husband and her two adorable children back in their new home, which her husband bought with the advance. Again, now the mortgage is too big. And she only deals with them on FaceTime and on Zoom. So she realizes that she's only seeing the video, the pictures that her husband is allowing her to see on FaceTime and on Zoom. What's outside of the camera range? She begins to wonder that her husband is controlling what she sees of her own family. And she wonders, why is he doing that? And what's going on back home? And she cannot go home to find out.
Right, because she's so aware of letting everybody down. So even if she wants to go home, she can't, because there's instances where something happens and a bookstore thinks she's cancelled her event. And this is a really big deal. Like, bookstores can lose a ton of money if they have to refund people for tickets, etc. So she's got a lot of pressure on her.
I mean, it's interesting because this started out to be a fast-paced, propulsive thriller, and I hope it still
Yeah.
became that. But it turned out to be, interestingly, sort of a love letter to bookstores and librarians and to readers and to writers. Because when I had to focus so clearly on what matters to a bookstore, what matters to a library, and what they really do, and how difficult it is to run a bookstore, how one bad event can ruin your bottom line for a week. And so Tessa also realizes, and we all realize, that the success of our events leads to the success or failure of the bookstore's bottom line. And that, I just wanted to make sure in the book that bookstore owners know how much we as authors are aware of that, and how readers should be aware of that. So that when people say, oh, I don't need to go to the event at the bookstore, we say, yeah, you do. You do. If you want those bookstores to stay in business, you need to go to these bookstore events and buy books. So that was my subtle message. That was my subtle message throughout the book.
It was amazing. And it's like I recognize so many of these bookstore owners. I know you fictionalized all of them, but I was like, oh, I wonder if this is so and so here. It's just such a wonderful insight into publishing, into the world of publishing, who all the author has to be accountable to, who they have to work with, and who champions the author and therefore helps make them successful. So really, just for anyone who just wants to understand publishing, read this for that. But I mean, read it as well, because it is such a page turner, such an excellent thriller. Something that I also wanted to discuss, Hank, is that in the modern day, I find as an author, it's really difficult to write misunderstandings or disconnects because, however many years ago, that was easier. Nowadays, we've all got cell phones and we've got various ways to speak to each other and their social media, etc. But a lot of this book relied on those disconnects, people not being able to talk things through in the moment, which then led to something else. And I loved how you just kept coming up with more and more interesting ways for these disconnects. I mean, some instance it's the children's bedtime, or the couple is about to really get into it and then the children walk in. So Tessa doesn't want to argue with her husband while the children are there. So can we speak a bit about that in terms of losing reception in an elevator or losing reception because there isn't Wi-Fi, etc.?
The way I try to write a novel is by asking what would really happen. What might really happen in this situation? What would really someone do or someone think? And that's why, here's a little secret of the book. That's why Tessa lives in Massachusetts, but I sent her to the West Coast on book tour. That makes her 3 hours time difference with New York and with her husband. So that instantly sets up this difficulty in communications, because when you're on a different time zone from someone else, the rhythm of your life is different. You're always interrupting something, or somebody's always awake when somebody else is asleep, and the timing is all off. So Obviously, in writing a thriller, communications can't be easy, but I've told myself that I can have one dead cell phone battery in my entire life in my book. So I have used that up, no dead cell phone batteries. But the things that can really happen, you can't, the difference in using a cell phone on an airplane, the idea that office hours are over, the idea that, as I said, that there are different time zones, the idea that when you're on tour or when you're in real life, when you're on tour, you're starving, you're exhausted, you're under pressure. I can't talk to my husband at 5 minutes until the time that I'm supposed to leave for my event because I have to be at the event. So every single moment of every single day, there is a stricture on how much time an author has, how much time Tessa has. So she's always saying, we need to talk about this, but we need to talk about it later because I have to be at the bookstore, I have to be at the library, I have to be at the airport. And that kind of pressure is real, isn't it? It's not contrived difficulties. It's what would really happen in real life. You get on the airplane and they close the door and you cannot use your phone, that kind of thing. So I enjoy that. I love that. The obstacles. One of the things that I think makes a book work is how a main character or any character responds to an obstacle that's put in their way. When there's an obstacle, the character has to make a decision about what to do about that obstacle. And we can learn psychologically, we can reveal a lot about a character by that decision-making process, right? Do they do the wonderful, lovely, selfless thing, or do they do the venal, illegal, horrible, selfish thing? And then after a decision comes action. So every time there's an obstacle, necessarily there has to be action as a result, and then the book moves forward.
It was incredible because it was all plausible. And I was all like, oh my God, I've been there. That's happened to me. That's happened to me. So it was just, yeah, it was really amazing. And I was laughing because she's constantly eating salted things. She's having pretzels and stuff. And I remember on one book tour, my blood pressure went through the roof and I couldn't understand why. And it was all the salted almonds, salted pretzels, all of that. Hank, we're at the end of our time, which I don't know how that's happened. It's flown by. But for our listeners as well, we're often saying there needs to be tension between what the character is saying and what they're actually thinking and what they're feeling. And what we have here is a huge people pleaser, someone who wants everyone to feel appreciated, who wants everybody to feel comfortable, but she's not comfortable. So she's saying all the right things, but what she's feeling and thinking completely contradicts all of that. So this is a masterclass in that, to be writing what a character says, but what they're actually thinking and feeling. It's something I still wanted to chat to you about, Hank, but we've run out of time. So everybody get the book so that you can learn the masterclass of how to do that. Thank you so much for joining us, Hank.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always so much fun to talk with you. Thank you.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you'll join us for next week's show. In the meantime, keep at it. Remember, it just takes one yes.